thought I'd share with you today a little bit about obviously myself and my sporting career and how I progressed in getting to one of the highlights of my career, which was Sydney 2000, and I'd like to share a story with you about that time in my life. But before I get started, most people want to ask a question but don't really, because as adults we don't ask these kind of things, and most people want to know what my disability is or why I'm in a wheelchair, and it's okay to wonder that, most people do. But I was actually born with my disability. It's where the base of my spinal cord wasn't formed properly. Very similar to spina bifida a little bit, except my spinal cord did not protrude from my back. So I have very limited use of the lower half of my body. I've never run, jumped, done lots of things that I suppose most people take for granted. But in saying that, I don't think it's ever stopped me from going out there and achieving and doing anything that I ever wanted to in life either. So that is my disability. It doesn't actually have a name because I'm a conglomerate of a few different disabilities. I'm quite unique. So I don't have a name for my disability, sorry. Okay. As I grew up, obviously I didn't know any different. This is how I was, and they thought as a way of building my upper body strength, because that was what I was going to rely on for the rest of my life, they thought swimming would be a good way. So I was taught to swim at the age of 3. I had a lot of fun going to swimming classes at 3 years old, but I think the best thing, for me, not only learning the ability to swim and have a lot of fun, was my family and my parents, especially my mother, got to meet other parents who had children with similar disabilities. So it was a learning curve on many levels for both of us. I did join my local swim club with my older sister and had a lot of fun there, and I suppose it was good, but I couldn't quite compete again on the same level as everyone else. I was always a little bit slower and couldn't kick and things like that. I went to a regular primary school. I was the only child with a disability, and my teachers were great. They really integrated me into everything and anything that was on offer. Any sport that was happening, I got to play continuous cricket or t-ball, and I'd whack the ball and someone would either push me to the bases or I'd have a runner and we'd bowl over whoever was there, and it was a bit of a novelty. But for me, I couldn't really compete at the same level as everyone else. It wasn't until I was about 8 years old, I was in a shopping centre with my parents, and this lady came up to my mother and she says, "Oh, your child has a disability." And Mum's like, "Yeah, it's a little obvious." She says, "Have you ever heard about wheelchair sports?" And Mum was like, "Oh no, not really. What's all that about?" And so the lady, chatted away to my parents, and she said, "Well, there's a come and try day coming up. Would you like to come along? It'd be great to have you." So we thought, "Oh yeah, that'd be really good." So we went along to the come and try day, and I think my eyes popped out of my head. There were so many other children with similar disabilities, and they were doing everything. They were into the basketball, athletics, the field events, swimming, of course, all the different sports. And I thought, this is great. And, I'm just a slightly competitive person, just a little bit. And, of course, I saw all that and thought, I wonder if I'm any good at this, and I want to win, and I want to beat you all. So from that moment on, I suppose a window of opportunity for me opened, and I took that window and just made it bigger and bigger and bigger and took it as far as I could. I started competing for my state. I went to my first junior nationals when I was 9 years old in Perth, and continued on representing my state at many senior and junior competitions. It wasn't until 1990 I was at senior nationals, and they were in Canberra that year, and I wasn't swimming as much because I actually have scoliosis, which is curvature of the spine, and I got so bad that it was at a 90-degree angle. I had a nice S going on in my spine, and they fixed that up to a certain degree. It was I think it's now at 48 or something like that degrees, because to look at, I kind of look straight, but I'm very short in the body because I still have a nice S there. But I have 2 steel rods that help me stay straight-ish. So as a result of that, I didn't swim as much after that surgery, but I still competed in the basketball and athletics, of course. So in 1990, at the senior nationals in Canberra, I'd done fairly well in the basketball, but I'd done really well on the track, and I had done personal best times in all of my events. At the end of these nationals, they were actually announcing the Australian team to go to World Championships later on in that year. And I thought, maybe there's a chance I'll get to go. This could be awesome. So the final dinner of at that competition, they were announcing the people that were going to go to represent Australia, and I'm sitting there waiting, and my last name starts with S, so waiting around to see whether I get announced. And eventually I did. I got announced. I was 16 years old. I was going to represent Australia at the World Championships in athletics later that year. I couldn't believe it. I was going to wear the green and gold, and I was going to be so proud to go. I came home from those champs and from those nationals and trained really hard until we got to go overseas. Now, the world champs were in Athens, they're in Assen, in Holland. Now, I'd never travelled overseas without my parents before or anything. I'd never experienced anything quite like the games. So I had no idea what to expect. So I got to the village, and I was in an environment that was very unknown to me. I was the youngest on the Australian team, and I was one of the youngest there at the World Championships competing. And I was in this environment with so many other different people from different countries and different cultures and different disabilities. And when something's a little different, you all kind of stare and have a look and wonder about things. And so, I got to those World Championships, and there were so many people with different disabilities, amputees, cerebral palsy athletes. There were just other people in wheelchairs. It was just, a bit of an eye-opener. And I remember going to the dining hall, and I was in the dining hall. I just about finished my meal. I was ready to clear up my plates. And this guy walked in with his mate. His mate had no arms at all. I'm like, oh yeah. So his mate came into the dining hall, and he got a tray, and he put down 2 big bowls of pasta, and I thought, I've got to see how this works. So I sat back down at my table and waited for these guys to sit down, and he put the pasta in front of his mate with no arms. And before I knew it, this guy had his foot on the table and a fork in his toes, and away he went. And I thought, right, okay, that's how you do it then. So for me, it was a bit of an eye-opener on many levels and a learning experience. We got down to the competition side of it, and I was entered in 2 events at those World Championships, the 100 metres and the 200 metres, very short distances. Now, I made it through to the final of the 100 metres and got on that start line, very short race. Gun went and off I went, and I got to the finish line first. I thought, you beauty, this is all right. I was at my first international competition, and I won my first gold medal ever. I was so excited. And as you do, you ring home. This was pre-mobile phones. And went off to the phones and rang home, and they were so excited for me and couldn't believe it and wished me all the best for my next race, which was going to be the 200. So a few days later, I made it through to the final of the 200 metres. Same thing happened, got on that start line, gun went, I went, got to the finish line first. I thought, this is awesome, I've got 2 from 2, I can't do any better. So again, I went off to the phones, rang home, told them all about it. And they couldn't believe it and couldn't wait for me to get home and to see the medals and everything. And this is before I got my medal presented to me or anything, and I'm coming back towards the track. And my coach at the time, Jenny, she's looking at me, and she's walking towards me, and she doesn't look too happy. I'm thinking, oh, what's going on here? And she said, you've been disqualified. I said, what? She says, no, you came out of your lane, and I'd gone on the inside of my lane, and that was deemed as taking a shortcut. So I didn't get that second gold medal. I was DQ'd, and it was, I suppose, a big learning curve for me there, and I didn't actually compete in a lot of races after that where you have to stay in your lane, which is good. So, but for me, that competition was the turning point in my career, or the start of my career as an athlete. I came home from that competition, I was talking with my family and my friends, and what a great trip we'd had, and all the things that had happened. Of course, the guy with no arms eating this pasta and all these things. And I turned to my dad and I said, Dad, I'm going to be a professional athlete, Dad. He's like, yeah, rightio. Sure. And I suppose at the time I was very much discouraged. you know, I was a female athlete, I was an athlete with a disability, and, you know, my sport didn't exactly get on TV or in the papers very much. It was, you know, how are you ever going to make a living out of that, seriously? But, you know, my mother would say, oh, you know, let her go, she'll only do it for a couple of years or something like that, you know. But, you know, I can sit here now and say that I was on the national squad and represented Australia for over 14 years and did become a professional athlete, did make a living out of my sport, and my father was extremely proud of me. So I proved them wrong. But that competition is where I saw what my sport was all about. I saw a particular racer called Connie Hansen. She was a Danish racer. Now, Connie was the best in the world. She was so fast, she won everything, and everyone gave her the respect and didn't talk to her because, oh, that was Connie, she's so good and everything. And, you know, I looked at Connie and just thought, I want to be the best in the world and I'm going to beat you. So that was kind of my goal. I came home and trained really hard, and of course in 2 years' time I went to my first Paralympic Games, which were in 1992 in Barcelona. I was entered in 4 events and I came home with 3 gold and a silver, and my silver was in the 800 metres and I got silver to Connie Hansen. That was the last time she ever beat me, but she also retired 2 years later, but we won't go there. Since then, I have represented Australia at 4 Paralympic Games and 3 Olympic Games, and you might say, well, how can you go to the Olympics and the Paralympics? Now, we all know what the Olympic Games is, the premier event for the able-bodied athletes every 4 years. I like to call it the test event because the premier event then is the Paralympics, of course, which is the highest level of competition for athletes with a disability. But at the Olympics, they've had demonstration events. They haven't in the last Olympics in Beijing, but prior to that, they've had a demonstration event for wheelchair athletes. So they've had an 800 metres for women and a 1500 metres for men. So in the year 2000, I had the opportunity to represent Australia twice, once at the Olympics and once at the Paralympics. Now, what I used to do every year was sit down at the end of the year prior and go, map out my year and basically decide all the races and competitions that I wanted to do. And, you know, being the person I was, I wanted to win everything. Little unrealistic. But my goal was in the year 2000 was to win the Boston Marathon in April, to win gold in the Olympics and gold at the Paralympics. I didn't win the Boston Marathon, I came second, unfortunately. I can sacrifice that one. But at the beginning of the year, Australia, being the host nation of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, were given 2 wild cards. Now, a wild card is basically free entry into those races, into those Olympic demonstration races, because they want an Aussie in that race. So they couldn't decide in the end who to give the 1500 metre men's wild card to. But they really wanted me to have the 800 metre women's one. And I kind of ummed and ahed whether I would actually take it or not, because I thought, well, that's not really fair, is it? You know, kind of take my free ride into that race. But at the end of the day, I thought, well, you know, I really want to be in that race. So I ended up taking this free wild card into that race. But I thought that, you know, to get into this race the illegal way, I had to compete a month prior. The trials to get into that final race were held a month prior in Switzerland. So I intended to go to Switzerland anyway and race. But 2 weeks before I left, they said, well, no, you can't race in those trial events because you already have your spot. So I went to Switzerland and raced in all the other events bar the trials. So I sat there and watched the other girls fight out for the last 7 spots because there was 8 in a final, knowing that I already had my spot. It was a bit tough. But we came home from Switzerland and we had a few weeks before we had to go into the Olympic Village. And, you know, I trained really hard and worked really well with all the hype going on in Sydney. It was pretty tough. Now, I have this problem where I start to think about things way too much. And I get to the point where I start thinking about my races and all the possible consequences. Because it's an 800, you don't stay in your lanes. There's a lot of tactics involved. You can draft the other wheelchair athletes. And, you know, there's a multitude of possibilities that could happen in a race. So I started to think about these things all the time. Started thinking about, you know, what happens if I go out fast, or what happens if this person cuts me off if I get blocked, or, you know, if this happens, and what if the weather's terrible, and, you know, what if it's raining and this and that. And then I'd think of the consequences of that and then go on again, and then I'd go back to the beginning and think of another, you know, scenario and go from there. And as a result of overthinking all the time, I couldn't switch off at night. So I'd go to bed and I'd be like, okay, just go to sleep now. And I couldn't. I just could not switch off and go to sleep. And as a result of not sleeping well at night, I ended up getting really, really sick. And this was the week prior to the Olympic race in Sydney 2000. So the day before the race, the Olympic Games, we moved into the Olympic Village. We were met at the gates by some of the other Olympic Australian officials and escorted to our lovely demountable box that we were going to stay in, because there was a lot of non-permanent housing in the village as well as the permanent housing. I suppose we weren't going to be there for long, so they just gave us the demountables. But we were escorted there with all our luggage, and I had to push, you know, in my day chair, the one I'm in now, about 800 metres, and I got to our accommodation, I'm like, puffing and puffing, thinking, God, I feel terrible, I've got a race tomorrow night. I didn't feel well at all. We got into our accommodation, and there was myself, my coach, and there was two Aussie boys that made it to the 1500 metre final, so there was 4 of us. That night we settled in, and the boys, we went off to do a light training session at one of the warm-up tracks. And I was too ill to go and have a push, so I ended up just going over to the track and sitting with the coach. Started to look out, and I started to see my competitors. I started worrying about it again, you know, what have they been up to the last month? Are they faster? And I bet you they're not sick. What am I going to do? You know, I started stressing out about things. We came back to the village and had some dinner and got settled into our demountable boxes. Now, the next day our race wasn't going to be until later in the evening, so we had the whole day to kill. So it had been raining earlier that day, and I went to bed the night before thinking, you know, as long as it doesn't rain tomorrow, it'll be okay. You know, I went to bed with that thought, you know, it'll be okay, it won't rain. So the next morning we slept in as much as we could because we had the whole day to kill, and I woke up to the sound of the rain just hammering down on top of our little box. I thought, great, it's really good. I feel terrible, and now it's raining. We got up and had some breakfast and came back and got all our gear organised, changed tyres, got all the advertising covered up on our race chairs, got all our gear organised, and then went and had a late lunch. And you know how I told you the dining hall was a little interesting in my first World Championships? I can tell you now, the dining hall at the Olympic Games is rather interesting too. It's full of loads of famous people you only ever see on TV, and you kind of have a good perv in there too. There's a lot of nice bodies to look at, and yeah, you can spend a few hours in there. So I did, and had some lunch. We then came back to our accommodation again and got all our gear together that we would need for the night. You know, all our uniforms, tools, helmet, gloves, spare uniforms, absolutely anything, numbers that we would need, anything that we would need for that night, we could possibly think of, a ceremony tracksuit, everything. We got all our gear organised. I then dosed myself up with as much legal drugs as possible. I had the paracetamol going, I had the nasal spray going, I had everything to make myself feel a little human. We then went to the warm-up track. We got there in plenty of time, no problem. So I sat there at the track thinking, you know, knowing exactly how long it would take me to get in my race chair, how long it would take me to warm up, I knew exactly. So I'm sitting around at the warm-up track looking around, trying not to freak out, thinking, oh, I've got to find something to distract myself. So I'm looking around the track, and there was one of the sports psychologists, Jeff, who'd been there in '96, 4 years earlier. I thought, I'll go and have a chat with Jeff. So I went up to him and took all of 5 minutes. Came back and I thought, what am I going to do now? I've got ages to kill. And I was looking out onto the warm-up track. And there was one of Australia's 800 metre runners, Tamsin Lewis. She was out there. I'm looking at Tamsin and I'm thinking, what is she doing? She was trying to start on a set of blocks. You know how the runners use the blocks to start on? But she's an 800 metre runner. They don't use blocks. So I'm thinking, what's Tamsin up to? So I'll go and see. So I went up to Tamsin and I said, how you going, mate? She goes, yeah, good. I said, what are you doing, mate? You trying to start on some blocks? She goes, oh, yeah. She said, I've got to start the 4x4 relay. I don't know what I'm doing. I said, oh, right. So she's out there with Peter Fortune, one of the coaches. I said, well, do you need a hand then? And she goes, well, yeah, that'd be good, actually. She said, every time I take my first stride out of the blocks, put down a piece of tape where my foot lands. I said, all right, then I can do that. Not too technical. And so I did that. And every time she'd come back and they'd rearrange the blocks, she'd start again and they'd move it a little bit, off we'd go. We're doing that for quite a few minutes. And Tamsin said to me, aren't you racing tonight? I said, yeah, I'm racing tonight. She goes, oh, geez, I'd be feeling sick by now and having those butterflies in my stomach. And I'm thinking, shut up, Tamsin. But you know what? She was my perfect distraction. I came back and I was thinking to myself, I don't even know how to run, let alone use a set of blocks. But she was my perfect distraction. I came back, got in my race chair and got all my gear together and went out there and started warming up. And I just felt really bad. I couldn't hit the speeds I wanted to, and I just felt really awful. And I tried really hard. I tried with some of the guys to draft with them to get some speeds up and do a good warm-up. And I came off the track and my face was just as red as a beetroot. And I came up to my coach and he said, that's it. Just stop. There is nothing more you can do. And he was right. I'd done all the hard work. I'd done all the preparation. I'd done everything that I possibly could have. I couldn't help the fact that I was sick. There was nothing more I could do. He said, go to the call room. Now, there's a little bit of a process between the call room and when you guys from the warm-up track and when you guys actually see us on the track. The first call room is basically a big white tent at the warm-up track. And you go in there and they kick you off and make sure you got the right numbers and have all your chairs taped up and it conforms to the measurements and so on, and make sure you've got the right number, uniform. Apparently it's happened. And then you go from here, and in Sydney, between the warm-up track and the main stadium, there's a road, and to get to the main stadium, we actually came out of the call room, the white tent, down a spiral tunnel, which took us underneath the road, and we actually ended up level with the track, and we're underneath the stands where everyone's sitting in the stands. And we go underneath the stands, there was a little mini track where you could go up and down and hopefully not hit each other and keep warm. And then they take you to another call room and do the same thing over again. Now, this night in September was actually the night that Australia's long jumper, Jai Charima, was winning a silver medal. And Jai was already out there jumping. And every time Jai jumped, the crowd would just go off. It was so hyped up and loud. And eventually, after our second call room, we got out there and they said we could enter the track about 100 metres round from the start finish. And I was the only Aussie in the race. So we came out of this little tunnel very sheepishly and they told us to wait there before they let us do the 300 round. So I waited there. And then people started recognising it. Oh, there's a wheelchair race on. Oh, cool. What's going on here? And then they started yelling at me. Oh, Louise. Oh, you're in this race. And they started yelling and screaming at me. Come on, we want to take a photo. Can you turn around? And I'm thinking, I'm trying to focus here. I'm nervous. Because, I came out of that tunnel and it was just a sea of colour and noise was just deafening. There was 110,000 people in the stands. It was amazing. Eventually, they let us do 300 metres around the track to the start finish. I came out and I wanted to find something, one thing to put me at ease. Recognise someone in the crowd, like that was going to happen. an official, anything. You know, I'd raced there before, but everything was just so different. So I did that 300 metres and I didn't find anything to put me at ease or to make myself feel comfortable. I got to the start line, this voice came over the loudspeaker, and tonight we have the 800 metre women's wheelchair demonstration event. And that voice was a friend of mine, Kathy Lee from Victoria, and she was up there, and I thought, okay, Kathy's not going to screw it up. She was the one thing that I needed to make myself feel comfortable. Now, my plan for this race was not to be a fast one because I didn't feel particularly well. I was hoping it was going to be slow and I could control the pace and, you know, basically do what I wanted to do and be a slower race, more tactical. So we were announced, and eventually the gun went and off we went. It's 2 laps of the track. First lap I was in control, I was near the front, and it was as if the girls on the outside of me waited for me. Nice of them. I got to the front and I controlled the first lap. When the bell went for the last lap, I pulled out and hopefully was trying to get the other girls to come through. I stayed out in lane 2, lane 3. My plan was with 200, 150 to go, I was going to put my head down and just go as hard as I could and be clear of the other girls so I had a clear path. So the bell went for the last lap, stayed in lane 2, 3, was clear, down the back straight, got to the bend, thought, right, this is it, make it or break it, put my head down and went as hard as I could. I didn't know at the time, but the crowd got off out of their seats and just yelled and screamed harder than they were before. And I felt as if a rush of air came underneath me and pushed me home. I could do no wrong. I had at least 90% of the crowd wanting me to win. I came through to the straight and I did win. I came across first and I just absolutely felt like the weight of my shoulders came off and I was so relieved. And I did a victory lap and I wish I'd done 2 now. I later on came back to get my medal presented to me by Juan Antonio Samrich, the head of the International Olympic Committee. And I can tell you now there is nothing better than being in the #1 position, having a gold medal placed around your neck and the anthem being played and the flag raised because you are #1 in the world. It makes absolutely everything worthwhile for that particular moment. All those times where you got up at some stupid hour in the morning and trained by yourself in the cold and the wet makes absolutely everything worthwhile. And having 110,000 people sing the anthem with you is kind of cool too. But I did want to show you that race now, if I may, and then I'll quickly finish off because I know time's an issue.
Japan Sauvage is going to win it. Louise is coming away and she comes home to win.
Thanks very much, and thanks so much for having me. I really do appreciate it, you know, as if I'd show you a race where I didn't win. But, thank you very much for having me, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.